We are live. Hey guys, Fight Commentary Breakdowns here. This is Richard, and Richard does Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. He's on the West Coast like me. So, Richard, welcome.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks.
Definitely. So, tell me about your martial arts journey. Was Brazilian Jiu Jitsu the first martial art you did? Did you kind of like explore a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Well, I wanted to do martial arts since I was a kid. I initially really wanted to do Kung Fu. My parents wouldn't let me because they felt like Kung Fu schools were like recruiting grounds for gangs, which I think like growing up in Taiwan is more of a thing than it is here. But they thought I was gonna like get in the triads or something if I joined a Kung Fu school.
Wow.
So I wasn't allowed to do it. And then when I went to university, I did Kendo for a couple years and didn't really love that. And I think the UFC had kind of become a thing by then, and so I had learned about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, but it wasn't until I got to like I took a few classes here and there, but then it wasn't until I got to Boston where I was working that I actually had the time to like go there after work and start training. And I've sort of been on and off. I'm like your almost like your typical blue belt story. I don't know if people know about it. You know, like you work really hard as a white belt, then you get your blue belt, and then that's when like 90% of blue people drop out because after blue belt, it's like the chasm between blue and purple is so great that most people just if they don't get another belt or another stripe, they don't do it. And
Mm.
so I was like on and off, and then I decided to get serious again like the beginning of this year, and then the coronavirus happened, and now I'm like at home doing drills on the floor in a
Yeah.
room.
Tell me
Yeah.
about that first class in Boston. What was it like?
Yeah, it was interesting. I went when basically it's his name's Alexander Costa. He was my professor at the time. He's great.
Mhm.
Gracie Baja Back Bay. Shout out
Mhm.
to them. And the whole school had gone to, I don't know, somewhere else in Massachusetts because they were doing a jujitsu tournament, and I didn't know about that. So I just showed up at like the regular hours listed on the website. And so he basically gave me a private lesson and
Mhm.
showed me how to do an armbar and like walk me through the basics. By then I had taken some like occasional MMA classes here and there, so like he was like, "You want to roll a little bit?" And I was like, "Sure." And so he mounted me, and then even though he mounted me and I knew nothing about it, like I thought maybe I could try like a cross collar choke, and
Uh-huh.
he was like too nice not to just like immediately throw an armbar on me because he's like sitting on my chest and I'm like trying to reach up, grab his neck, and of course that doesn't work for anyone who
Mhm.
knows even basic jujitsu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So the first class was a private. It was with the professor.
Mhm.
And then, of course, you went back. And then how were the classes structured? Most Gracie Baja schools I visited, they kind of have like the same set of warm-up curriculum. And then, like, they teach a bunch of moves. And then at the end, they kind of do some rolling, right? Is that kind of how it was?
Yeah, yeah. It was similar. I think it was like this must have been like gosh, like 2013 maybe, 2012 something like that. So it was I think like it was a kind of a transitionary period. So there were times when he was still trying to teach his own thing, but like the as time went on, it was like now everybody all the white belts had to have their names written on their lapels, and like the classes got a little bit more structured and everybody was supposed to teach the same curriculum. I don't know if they're still doing that anymore or if things have changed since then, but yeah, I think most jujitsu schools, especially if you come from that like Gracie lineage, is still like, move of the week or like move of the day or whatever. And then like drill that a bunch of times, and then it's like take that move and evolve it to the next step, and then here's the submission you could hit from that, or here's the escape you could hit from that, and then 30 minutes of drilling after that.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So tell me about your initial kind of white belt challenges. What were some things you really got quickly? What were some things you had to work on a lot to get?
Oh, interesting. So white belt, let's see, it's been a while, but white belt challenges, there are a couple of them. One was just being comfortable, like laying on top of somebody, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was like maybe about a couple months into it, and just like people, I could not stay on top of people to save my life, even though I'm like a pretty big guy, and like I finally realized what it was is it's like you when they say like you have to put your weight on someone when you're grappling, you really have to like basically focus all of your weight on your chest and then push that chest onto someone else's body to keep them inside control or whatever. And so they were just like, dude, like you're huge and yet you just like put this frame over people, like you're like kind of on your elbows and knees and the other guy just keeps getting out from under you. So that was one. And then the other one was like rolling with women was like super awkward and weird for me for a little while. And then the instructor's wife, so she was like, "Hey, like coach says I'm supposed to roll with you." And I was like, okay. And then she was just like merciless. And so I was like fighting for my life because for the most part I had been, the times we did roll, I was like going super easy on the girls. And then this was once when I was like, "Oh, okay, like I actually have to like I was like drowning because she's like a black belt, and so that from that moment on, I was like, okay, like I can understand. You can go a bit harder, especially if someone like has skill. And those are kind of the first white belt challenges. Uh, Also, the spazzing, I guess, is a big one. Like, learn to breathe and don't just use all your strength, and because it doesn't matter. Like.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to get out of this one anyway, even if you try to bench press the guy off of you or whatever.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's funny you talk about rolling with women because I find also if it's with gis, it's a little easier, but if it's no gi, that's when I find it really awkward. It's like especially if she's very attractive, which in LA the thing is there's a lot of like actress girls, right? So you're just
Right.
like, I'm sure every guy's like, oh man, what if I pop a little stiffy? Oh no, like every guy probably has that in his mind, like, oh no. But usually what happens is like they're really good. The women usually are very good. So
Hmm.
like they'll destroy you. So you're too busy not thinking about that.
Yeah, I find that that's the same with me. Now I still am a little bit uncomfortable doing no-gi with girls, but generally their technique is so incredible that it doesn't you don't think about it like after you touch hands, basically.
Yeah, and it's really funny too. At least the jiu-jitsu schools that I've been to, because a lot of times it's just because like women who do Brazilian jiu-jitsu usually tend to be very attractive, right? Because they're like, oh my God, well, I'm getting hit on by guys. What if this happens? So like they're it's like almost like a defense thing. They're proactively
Mm.
or sometimes reacting. I've heard a statistic that apparently the majority of women apparently, okay, for those of you who can correct me if I'm wrong, please let me know. But apparently, the majority of women who do present jiu-jitsu have actually been assaulted before. So, yeah, it's like, but anyways, like the women that do present jiu-jitsu tend to be very attractive. So, like, there's that like extra like thing. But where I was going with this is that like because usually the guys still outnumber the women in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes, so you can just tell every guy's eyes, no matter if they can't, like, they're trying to hide it, they're just like, oh, I want that to be my next girlfriend. Like, every guy's trying to, like, be extra nice to her, trying to, like, talk to her. It's really funny.
Oh man, I remember like I've been at jujitsu schools where like the women leave because they like come and then they like immediately it's like oh the higher purple belt is suddenly dating her now and then like they break up and then she stops coming to class and you're like oh gee like what happened?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, oh, that's hilarious. Okay, so tell me about that day you got your blue belt. What happened and how did it feel?
The blue belt was interesting because I traveled a lot. I kind of was like working in a bunch of different places, and I was in New York. I had missed the belt promotion ceremony the week before or a couple weeks before, and then I was moving, and I didn't tell my instructor until like the week before I was moving. I was like, hey, like, I've been at this for a long time, basically. I think it's been like 3, 4 years or something, and most people get their blue belt after like 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I just want to know like if we can talk about what I need to work on and stuff because I'm moving to LA now. And so he was like, yeah, okay, like we'll talk about it. And then he did the thing where like you get to the end of the class and then he like pulled like called like basically did the talk and it was like they usually do this thing where they're like this person's been working really hard and he's a killer and whatever he's been contributing and it wasn't until they were like and then he's like moving so we wanted to give him to him earlier but we weren't able blah 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 and I was like oh shit like they
No, it's all
oh
good. It's
gee
all
like
good.
they're talking about me and so he pulled out the belt and it was the coach Josh Griffiths who gave it to me so it was great.
Hmm. Wow, that's pretty cool. So then you moved to LA, which is how long were you in LA?
LA was about 2 to 3 years.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And
and
did
that
you try
was
to find gyms around LA?
I did. I trained at Kron for a while, but like
Ooh.
work was insane. I think the toughest part about my martial arts journey has been having to do that while also working in the advertising industry, because a lot of
Mm,
agencies expect you to be there like night and day,
yeah.
working weekends, and it's super frustrating if you don't show up for more than say like 2 sessions. Really, you should be hitting like 3 or 4, and you shouldn't be missing the Saturdays when you do jujitsu, because like it's very easy to forget something if you don't drill it like 2 3 times a week. And then the
Yeah.
second thing is like
Yeah.
it's really hard to make friends with people and get regular training like sparring partners if you don't show up on Saturday and like get lunch with them afterwards and do
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I trained for a while at Kron's, but it was like I probably actually had a class with Kron like 2 3 times.
Mm,
Whereas other people, if you go regularly, like Kron gets to know your name, like you and Hickson kind of know each other, and they
mhm.
like you're getting these like mini seminars basically from
Yeah.
like the greatest whoever put on a gi for jujitsu.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so I studied there, but then eventually I was just like, I can't really do this. And so I did a Gracie Garage thing. Like I was
Hmm.
going to this guy who was wanted to train to become, he was like a brown belt at the time, and he wanted to become like a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu instructor. And so he was giving privates, basically teaching privates or small sessions, like 3 4 people out of his garage. And he just had a bunch
Hmm.
of mats down there, and we would do like fight training and stuff like that.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And so then you moved to San Francisco?
Yeah.
Wow. And you've been in San Francisco since then?
Yeah, I have.
Wow. How is it like in San Francisco now with the training?
Well, these days the training's non-existent because of the lockdown, obviously.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
San Francisco's great. I was at Homolo Melos for a while. I took a year off because I was like, I need to focus on striking, and then I maybe took like 3 Muay Thai classes that whole year. I think sometimes striking is just like really hard to get in. Like, if it's not your thing, it's not your thing, right? So
Hmm.
I'd love to get back into it, but I just decided, you know what, like if it's jujitsu or getting fat, I'd rather choose jujitsu. So I came back. I train at Health Gracie's now, and it's been a great experience. And
Wow.
people who are in San Francisco, like I don't think you can miss it because it's like at Folsom and like 8th and 7th Street, and it's like all glass. And you can, if you go by it, you can see it has like Health Gracie's like logo on it, and the whole place like fogs up every night around 5 or 6 o'clock as classes
Yep.
start. Yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. You know, you mentioned something really interesting, which is like the aesthetics, right? The aesthetics are so important for schools, for dojos, etc. And it like I've been to jujitsu places where it looks so boutique, and then I've been to jujitsu places it looks so industrial, but they all work. It's like it works for
Hmm.
different psychologies. Like Orlando Sanchez, giving him a big shout out. His Gracie Baja place in like little Tokyo art district area because it's like a converted like lot. So it like the ceilings, it's got the super big, almost like high school gym type of big lights, and then
Hmm.
the platform and the mats are actually raised like a lei tai. So it's like it's a really cool type of vibe. And then there's like a place in West LA called Meraki, which is like
Hmm.
it's like black exterior. Like oh, it's like every place has its own thing. Like you go to Cobrinha Jiu-Jitsu, it's like in there, super clean. Like Art of Jiu-Jitsu Hafa's place is also like super clean. Every person has like their own kind of branding, and branding is like so important. Like the first thing to get right is your branding. The second thing to get right is of course your marketing and like how you do business with people. But like if you don't get your branding right, you just get lost.
Yeah. I think you can also really tell like whoever the head instructor or the owner is, like what he likes to almost like what he likes to wear and rep outside of the gym is how the gym will come across kind of um like Clockwork Jiu-Jitsu in New York, Josh Griffith's place, like their hoodies and jerseys and stuff, like they look really cool because they're kind of like sometimes they'll have like a Motorhead like rock band aesthetic, or it'll be like kind of like something you'd see on Hype Beast. And then like that's kind of how like their jujitsu gear and that's how their gym is. And there's all these brands of like gi that gis that are popping up now that, you know, like the old school ones are like you put on that gi and you look like a race car because you got like logos and patches all over you. And
Yeah.
now like it's kind of gone the other way where now it looks like something that like they could do a collaboration with Supreme next week or something, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Forget I think about 10th Planet people and all their rash guards and gis look so cool. It's like
Right.
wow, am I like stoned or am I
Yeah.
actually like looking at a gi
Right.
or
Those
not
should be
gi,
like
a
banned
rash
from
guard?
competition or something. You can get high just staring at their
Yeah,
rash
yeah,
guard.
exactly, exactly. And maybe it's a good psychological advantage. You'll get like flustered by looking at them. Well, where's the arm again? Oh, ah!
Right. Yeah. Am I fighting a person or a black hole, like galaxies?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Wow. So um you thought about doing striking for a little bit, and then you went back into jiu-jitsu. Are there any other martial arts you want to try once this kind of lockdown subsides?
Yeah, I think definitely Muay Thai. Muay Thai and Jiu Jitsu are the two big ones. There's like a praying mantis school near my house that I pass by all the time, and I would be interested in like popping my head in and just kind of understanding, sort of like to satisfy the like 10-year-old me that like never
Yeah,
got to do Kung Fu because his parents wouldn't let him.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, that those two would probably be the main ones. Yeah, I don't know. How about yourself?
um I think so. My buddy who comes on my channel sometimes, Coach Paris, he's a kickboxing coach, right? So right before this lockdown happened, I had a gym membership at a boxing gym. I was taking boxing. So my plan was I was going to do a year of boxing, and hopefully the gym that I was training at is still open after this. Man, I don't know if they're gonna, I really hope they stay alive. But anyways, so I was gonna do boxing for like a year, and then after that, I was probably gonna train kickboxing with Coach Paris. That was the plan, or probably what Coach Paris is gonna convince me to do is while I train boxing, I'm gonna train kickboxing with him too. So it's like I'll train boxing at the CMC place I was training at, and then I'll train kickboxing with him like with private. So that's probably what's going to happen. Just because, my history, I did a lot of kung fu when I was young, and I've always wanted to feel like that wasn't a sunk cost. So like the striking stuff I'm learning, it's almost like okay, all that stuff I learned in kung fu, maybe some of it can be kind of like adapted into my foundation, so to speak, or it's just like I'm just completely throwing that out the window and rebuilding my foundations with striking. But either way, I think I'm gonna focus on striking for a while.
Right, right. Get that like Tony Ferguson Wing Chun technique going.
Exactly, exactly. It's really interesting because let me see. Actually, I'll grab my boxing gloves real quickly. I think what people don't realize is you know how with like MMA gloves, smaller, right? With boxing gloves, and I didn't realize this until I started boxing gloves. Look at this. They actually shield your face
Oh
much
yeah.
better than hold it like here. That's why in boxing, like so many of the covering up and stuff work. Like that's why if you look at MMA, like it's hard for them to do a lot of the things in boxing
Mm,
that like you see people boxing do. So I know like once I like train boxing, let's say get to a level I'm happy at. I'm not even gonna pretend I'll get good because that's not my point, and I don't have an ego. I just want to get to a point where I'm happy with where I'm at. But I know I'm gonna have to eventually unlearn some of that too, because these aren't your fists. Most people's fists aren't this big.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember I forgot which art it was. There's some instructor or someone I saw somewhere where it's like they don't even care if the guy puts the guard up because I think if you're not wearing giant pillows on your hands the way boxing gloves are, like if like in MMA, let's say, you can like roundhouse kick someone and if they try to put an arm up to block, you can still wreck their arm or
yeah,
have the
yeah,
arm hit their face and it's
yeah,
almost as good as having him punch himself, you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so I think probably in a year, there's going to be a lot of interesting content on my channel as I start like thinking about how like this stuff and other striking arts that maybe have smaller pillows. I love that word, smaller pillows on your
Yeah.
hands, like how they can like intersect, but also the differences and similarities and stuff. So, it's exciting times ahead. It's just unfortunately I can't go through with that until all this lockdown. Yeah. I was gonna ask you more about the triads and the kung fu stuff because that is so fascinating. I'm from mainland China, so
Hmm.
I'm not mainland China, the kung fu is basically all watered down. So, like, tell me about like the kung fu in Taiwan. What percentage of, let's say, kung fu dojos in Taiwan have some kind of triad activity?
So to be honest, I don't actually know. I don't really know.
Mm.
I just like from what I've kind of inferred, like reading martial arts novels and like there's a whole tradition of like Hong Kong like John Woo action cinema, and they use the same words. Like when you talk about gangsters in Hong Kong, the triads, they use the word jianghu, and like
Hmm.
jianghu is that word that kind of means like everything that's outside of the mainstream. It's like kind of the Chinese description of now it has this like noble connotation, right? Because it's
Yeah.
using kung fu novels for the most part. But back then it was like if you weren't a farmer or like an official or like a city dwelling folk who stayed where he was his whole life, you were in the jianghu. And jianghu
Yeah.
means like rivers and lakes, right? Which is
Yeah.
like people would sail around and they would be the no like they would kind of lead a nomadic lifestyle. And a lot of those people did run like either martial arts schools or they were part of like these martial arts, cliques or gangs. And there's actually like relations between that and like cults because if you study the history of China, a lot of the revolution, like a lot of the like the warring states periods and the Three Kingdoms periods, they get started because the empire becomes weak, and then like for the Three Kingdoms, that famous novel, for example, the Yellow Turban cult rose up, and so it's these people who like have religious connotations, and they also practice their own form of like ritualistic boxing and stuff that's supposed to
Mm.
confer special powers on you if you do the right movements, et cetera, et cetera. And then they like rise up and challenge the government, and so
Mm.
there's always been that kind of a tradition underneath the surface. It doesn't get covered in history books as much, but I'm just starting to notice it as I like read these, ancient Chinese novels and classics and stuff and delve into it. And you see that like in more recent times where like the Boxer Rebellion, for
Yeah.
example, right? It's like these people, these like martial artists believe that they could train their bodies, because they do those demonstrations where like the spear doesn't pierce them and the sword doesn't hurt them. And I don't know if they believe their own BS or if they like, or if they were kind of being hucksters the whole time. But there definitely was that element of like, hey, if this sword can't pierce me, then what can bullets do, right? And so
Yeah.
they led this rebellion. They started like killing like settlers and non-Chinese invaders. They considered them, and then they all like got eliminated basically as soon as like the army showed up. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, um,
There's there's a fascinating book about the foreign legation when it was being sieged because it was I think sieged for at least a few months before finally all the different armies came in from the different nations. So like it's a fascinating book. I read about halfway through the book before I had to return it. This was years ago, so I don't remember many details, but I do remember the foreign legation. They were lightly armed, but they had guns, and they managed to find like a cannon, like there was just a cannon buried somewhere. They dug it up and it could still fire, and they also had another cannon, so they had like I believe two cannons and some guns. And like basically every day the martial artists, the boxers would come with their swords and spears and get shot at, and a few of them or a lot of them probably would pass away and then they'd retreat, and the next day would be the same thing, the same thing, like the most
wow.
bizarre, like it's like I don't know how that was ever gonna succeed. And I don't know why it's see the empress or whatever, she wasn't the empress, she was the dowager, well, empress
Right.
dowager, why she encouraged these, but she was so, it shows like rulers have to be like in touch with reality a little bit. I heard that once she ran away from the forbidden city because the invasion by the foreign armies came in, that was the first time she ever saw what China was really like. And like
Hmm.
in her mind, she's like, "Wow, I screwed up. I really screwed up. My country's falling apart. I need to reform." But then she was old. What could she do? And then China was already screwed. So it's like
Right.
there's so many interesting lessons, and this is so cool. We're talking about this. I didn't expect this to go down this direction, but there's so many interesting lessons about like rulers and people in power and how in touch with reality. It doesn't have to be people in power, people with money, people with status, people with
Hmm.
influence. You got to be in touch with your constituents, or if you're in a kind of nation state that doesn't have constituents, you have to be in touch with the people you rule, because you don't want to be so out of touch that the first time you travel outside of your city after the foreigners basically took over your city and you're like, wow, I screwed up the country.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I also think like a lot of those it follows that pattern in China with the dynasties, right? It's like usually the first guy who rises up is actually a warrior. And then because his sons and grandsons, like with each succeeding generation, they're less warlike because they spend all their time in the palace. And then that makes them weaker. So I think like the emperor's the next his kids, they're like, well, those kids are useless. Like we have to super protect those ones and not let them see anything of the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you end up in this situation where like the last ones are usually like they have like no power and they're just being controlled by eunuchs or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting too that a lot of times what happens is the first emperor, the one that conquered all of China, he had to do it with the help of a lot of talented people. But
Hmm.
once you're in power, those talented people become a threat. So usually what happens is there's this term called baojun. Like when he rules, he starts eliminating all the friends, the people that helped him, because they're going to be a threat to his kids. So
Right.
it's like a double whammy. Your kids get sheltered, but they also don't have the nice advisors, the talented advisors that you yourself, the founding member, had. So it's like a double kind of like, yeah. And it's funny, like the Ming Dynasty, right? They had a really interesting history because the the uncles kept rebelling against like the nephews, because the nephews kept getting into power. So like that's what created kind of a slightly different type of like vibe in the Ming Dynasty, because the
Hmm.
Ming Dynasty after Zhu Yuanzhang, still like Zhu Di was still very powerful, and he had those crazy shifts that like China was the biggest naval power at the time. And then like once Zhu Di died, um his son died like a month later, so his grandson was in power, and then like the uncles, so like the uncles of that grandson tried to rebel again. So it like happened so many times. So like sometimes there's that old saying that like hard times create strong men, right? So like in the Ming Dynasty, it looks like the emperors, because they kept like getting rebelled against, or they were the ones to rebel. It just had to keep the country and like the ruling people on their feet and
Right.
strong.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Ming Dynasty is interesting too because they apparently had like the treasure fleets, right? Like they had
Yeah.
some of the strongest fleets, and like just imagine what it would be like if you had these like massive ships show up on your doorstep, and then they were like, "We're just here for two things: one, to give you gifts, like to compel service to the emperor or whatever, which is basically like." Just say that you honor the emperor and we're not really gonna bother you. And then the other thing was like I think they were hunting down like either an escaped rebel or like a fleeing prince or something
Yeah,
like that
they were
too.
they were hunting down the fleeing emperor because the uncle rebelled against the nephew, and so the nephew escaped, and so they were. That's one of the theories. I mean, I think most people in Chinese historical circles accept it as like not just a theory, but the emperor was trying to find him. So it's like,
Hmm.
oh, have you seen? I believe his name was Zhu Yuwen. Have you seen Zhu Yuwen? And because he apparently shaved his hair to escape as a monk, so that's how he escaped during the coup, and nobody saw him escape. But yeah, and it kind of makes sense because a lot of people, there was a very famous manual that I forgot what it's called, but it was written during the Ming Dynasty. It was like Kung Fu was probably at its heyday in the Tang Dynasty, because that was when like
Hmm.
the Indian influence, like the Shaolin Temple and all that, like the Kalipriatu or whatever it's called, like the origin of all that martial art came to China. And then in the Ming Dynasty, when they were powerful, and then later fighting off the Japanese pirates, like the Kung Fu was very strong in the army. So like, but it's because the Ming Dynasty history. That's why like they had, whether it's true or not. That's why the Kung Fu was so strong during that time.
Hmm. So I wanted to ask you about that because I mean I know like when I catch your Bushido videos and stuff, sometimes I go through the comments and things and like there's kind of a debate going on about whether or not traditional Chinese power martial arts were ever really strong or
Yeah.
were they like because I think back then at least since we've had cameras, it's been really hard to tell just how powerful traditional martial arts were. Is it because we're only getting the watered down version, or is it because it was never that powerful, but it like gave the soldiers or troops confidence? And then I was thinking about like you watch them all like lined up, and I almost feel like, you know, the way that like the Spartans or the Romans individually were very weak, but if you line them all up and they say like all punched at the same time or all like through their like, you know, hit their spears or put their shields up or whatever, then you couldn't fight them if they were a massed rank. And I was wondering if like the martial arts was actually not meant to be individualistic, but meant to be like, you know, fighting in a group. You don't need to know that many moves versus as an
Yeah.
individual.
And I think I've thought a lot about this too, and I I'm almost tempted to, right before you asked the question, I was trying to bring legitimacy to Chinese martial arts, but I'm almost tempted to more agree on the other side, which is probably Chinese martial arts was never really effective, like for one-on-one, because like you said, whatever battle formation, right?
Hmm.
If you like try to like show off, you try to like go and brawl, your army's gonna lose. You guys have to literally, okay, block, stab, block. It's like
Right.
it's more about discipline than anything. It's not about, ooh, I could take out 3 guys with one strike. It's not about all that. And on top of that, you think about it. What did China always have to its advantage? They had population and they had technology usually, but whenever they were kind of evenly matched with any of the horse nomads or the steppe people, they would always get their butts kicked, right?
Hmm.
They would always get their butts kicked unless they, strategically somehow did something or they just had better technology. And it seemed like if you were to put a soldier, like a Chinese soldier, or let's say even 10 Chinese soldiers versus, let's say, 10 Huns or 10 Mongols and had them just fight, I think every 10 out of 10 times the nomads or whatever, the Huzhen would win. And like it
Hmm.
was only because you gave them better armor or better, they had crossbows, or Chinese soldiers were the first to use guns and stuff like that. Like that was the only reason why they could like beat off the foreigners. So part of me thinks it's just that. It was just like it was never Chinese martial arts was basically never effective. And then like you have those stories of the Shaolin Temple and how the Shaolin monks helped Li Shiming or helped whatever other like Tang Dynasty emperor, and then you have all the stories, but then it's like I don't know. I really don't know, but I'm tempted to say it was probably never really effective. And then on the flip side, you have stories of the guy who invented Yang Tai Chi. Apparently, he was a
Hmm.
really good fighter. Like very few people, nobody could beat him. And his Tai Chi wasn't flowy. It was like beat you down in 3 seconds. But then, was it because his Tai Chi was good, or was it because no one else who challenged him really knew how to fight? Right?
Right.
It's always that. I mean, I tell this a lot. It wasn't like I really knew how to fight, but I had a few more moves than most people when I was growing up. So I won a lot of fights. I thought I was so good, but I sucked. It's just other people sucked even more, right? So it's
Right.
like that's the kind of thing I always think about. Like if let's say the guy who did Yang Tai Chi, his punches to the jaws or whatever were just quicker.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean he can fight. It just means other people didn't punch to the jaw as quicker. So he's knocking everyone out in like 3 moves. It's because it's exactly like when Xu Xiaodong fought Lele. And Xu Xiaodong was just going left, right. And Lele's like, and maybe that's what
Right.
the guy Yang was doing. He's trained this. All he's doing is training, your left to right, or maybe he's doing a hook or something. That's all he's doing. And then like all the other martial arts are trying to do all that stuff, and boom, they get knocked out. And then like
Hmm.
this myth starts evolving that this like guy who invented Yang Tai Chi was amazing. And then to get students, he has to like invent all this like stuff for people to learn, and then like his style, which was just how to knock people out with regular punches, becomes like this mythical thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm kind of inclined to agree with you on that too. Even, and I also think like context matters a lot, right? Like the thing that we'll probably never know just because it's too dangerous is like a lot of those guys like they had like they were not just like epic legendary warriors in hand-to-hand combat. A lot of them were like renowned swordsmen or like spearsmen or whatever. And so like modern Brazilian jiu-jitsu, if I took it back in time and was like I'm the greatest jiu-jitsu fighter, that's probably true, but I think back then 99% of fights didn't go to the ground because they stabbed each other or like
Yeah.
hacked at each other or something, right? And so my martial art would be pretty useless compared to people who are using ranged weapons.
Yeah. Yeah. And there
Yeah.
was the thought, I don't know how much validity there is, but I've heard many people say like Japanese. The reason why jiu-jitsu got so advanced and technical in Japan was because the samurais would duel. And then it's like, well, all right, well, you have all this armor, and what if I don't cut you correctly? Well, I can now grab you, I can now wrist lock you, right? So that's why it evolved from a context that was outside of, let's say, like the regular rank type of battlefield where two sides would clash.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. And I
that's
think
so
also,
interesting. Imagine like 100 people. Let's say 100 Mongols on horses are attacking a city of like 100, like defended by 100 Chinese people, and you like try to take them to the ground, all of them on their horse. Something that'd be like an interesting type of way to fight.
right.
You don't
Yeah,
even
and I
like,
think
catch them. The Mongols on their horses would be so quick. How do you even catch them and take them off their horse and take them to the ground and armbar them or something?
well, and also like, jujitsu talks about like what they call like the like red what was it? Like the green red green zone. Like green is like when you're here when you're out of striking distance. Red is when you're within striking distance, and then it's green again when you're so close together they can't strike you again, right? And so like a Mongol with a bow and arrow and a horse, that red zone is like infinite. The green
Yes.
zone is like if you're right on top of them, and how are you going to close that
Yeah.
distance where you're like yards and yards away, you know?
Exactly, especially if he also wrestles, and he's probably got like 10 knives in his like pocket anyway. So you get to the red green zone and you're stabbed.
Right. So it's a
Yeah.
red zone again, yeah.
Yeah, it's just basically it's a complete red zone. Like if you're gonna fight a Mongol or if you're gonna
Right.
fight a Hun or something like that.
Yeah, and I think you're right about like unless you're like a professional fighter, chances are you wouldn't really be able to stand a chance anyway.
Yeah.
Like I just think about like you can train your whole life. I feel it's almost like more effective back then like to learn some tricks, which is why they have these like amazing like almost like sword dance maneuvers, or like a lot of the kung fu is like these high kicks that you would never use in actual fight or something. And it's more like, oh, that guy, if he can like kick the light off the ceiling from a standing position, I better not mess with him, because imagine, and that's a lot of the like board breaking and stuff. Like part of it is to, develop your spirit so that you feel nothing about punching through a piece of wood or something. But we also know that the wood grains are aligned just in the right way so that they'll snap when you hit it.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is like watching this school of like formidable warriors just wrecking lumber or whatever is something that would keep you from wanting to fight that guy, even though like in a real fight, if he was trying to punch a person, he'd never be able to like punch through bone, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, for example, whether you're a bouncer nowadays in a bar or even back in the day when, let's say, you were the bodyguard or like the doorman to, let's say, someone powerful, I don't think it's your incentive to even get into a fight ever. You talk to any bouncer, they're like, yeah, my best day is if people challenge me and then they back off. So, like, I think you take that, like, let's say someone's the doorman back in the day in 200 AD to some powerful person, and some punk getting drunk is challenging him. Exactly like you said, do a kick in the street or something, or like punch that light out, and the guy's like, oh, okay, I'm not messing with you, right? That's the smart way. You don't want to risk you getting hurt. Then you're not going to get paid because you're recovering at home. You don't risk killing him. I mean, yes, your person's powerful, but what if that person messing with you has government connections or something, right? So like, you never want to risk a confrontation. So I think, like you said, even back in the day, remember there's that interview that Jet Li talked where he's like, yeah, back in the day it was all about killing. I don't even think it is that. Like you said, it's always about posturing, because the whole point is you want to appear deadly, and that gets you somewhere. You're never actually trying to actually go and like destroy someone.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I was watching this documentary a little while ago, and it was like this guy who had been trained in traditional martial arts, and he was like apparently highly skilled, but then like the communists took over, and so he wasn't allowed to run his school, and he had to go to a labor camp. But he trained every day while he was at the labor camp, and now that China is more liberalized again, he's able to demonstrate what he can do. And his honestly, his martial arts like skills were more like magic tricks, because like he had this ability to like move his chi into his palms, and he could like set paper on fire, or like he would put his hand close to you and then you would burn, it would feel like you were burning or whatever. So it was like proof that his qigong was so strong. And I honestly don't know. I'm really skeptical that actually has any like, fighting applicability, let alone if it's even real or not. Like maybe he's secretly got a heater or a candle in his sleeve or something, you know? I don't know. But I can see how it's like showing someone, like you were saying, like, hey, like, you think you can face me? Look at what I did to this piece of paper with my bare hands or whatever. Like, I'm setting things on fire. I have, like, the Kamehameha, like, loaded up, you know?
Yeah. This documentary that I mention a lot on my channel, Dragons of the Orient, they showed a lot of that, like, mystical stuff. And you analyze a lot of that now, and you realize, like, for example, there was a guy who climbed up a building. Well, guess what? Rock climbers can do that too, because the bricks had like enough finger space. Like you look at how much grip strength rock climbers, they'll do that and even better because rocks are uneven. Like basically that guy was just one of the first professional rock climbers in China. Or like under communism, there was no rock climbing, so he was like the only rock climber, right? It was like, it wasn't like he had chi. He was just a rock climber, and if he was in America, he'd be really good at rock climbing, and the rock climbers would like learn under him. Under rock climbing, not kung fu. And
totally.
Then, there was another story. I totally just like blanked. There was another. Oh yeah, yes. One of the places where I find all these like crazy Chinese martial arts clips that make my channel popular. That place, I saw someone upload a video. Parkour's been slowly getting into China, and like it's great that parkour is getting into China because China, Taiwan, Hong Kong. All three of these places have really tall buildings everywhere, man. If you want to get into parkour, they'd be great places. So, like, a lot more Chinese people are doing parkour, and they're actually jumping up buildings and, like, running up buildings. And when you realize it's just parkour, all that, like, flying stuff, it was just probably back in the day, people did parkour, too. But it wasn't called parkour back then. It was called, like, Qigong or, like, Tanjun Jiawu or something crazy. No, it's just parkour. Everyone can learn it as long as you don't accidentally snap your knee or like end your parkour career before. You can get good and you can jump up a building too. It's just really dangerous.
Yeah, I remember that because I remember in high school I knew this guy and he studied like karate or karate / kung fu with his master, but like his master was like a guy who was like a big deal in Hong Kong and then came here and had to get like a regular day job. So he was basically teaching out of his basement. And so he was like able to do insane things. But I don't think he ever had any illusion that it was like Qigong or something. It wasn't like he meditated for hours and suddenly could like fly through the air. It was like he just realized like, hey, if I like apply the jumping high kicks that I learned in karate to like the side of the school building, I could actually go from like the first floor up to like the roof and like touch the roof and come back down, which was like incredible to us. And I think you're right. Like, I think Hollywood and like even Hong Kong cinema kind of ruined kung fu for everybody because the things that would have been considered amazing and really impressive, like when you read about it in like a Jin Yong like novel, like a martial arts novel, like you have in your head some idea of what it was like, but if you watch like a movie, they have to make it like 10 times more epic than that. And as a result, you get like Ang Lee where they're like fighting while standing on top of bamboo trees and stuff like that, right? Yeah. Whereas like back then it was probably a little bit more realistic and it was like, okay, the guy flew through the air, but really he was just doing like a leaping kick or something, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Or he jumped on top of the building because the building was only 2 stories. So yeah, of course you could do parkour if you do it smart and probably go over the building. And in a way that's more impressive if portrayed the right way on camera. But like think about that first like French parkour movie that came out that inspired a whole generation of parkour artists. That was awesome. Like all those stunts were like real. That was cool. You don't need to like put ropes and wires on people and make them fly through the air. Just like like you said, a lot of that cinema to try to like appeal went overboard and actually kind of backstabbed a lot of this like cool stuff from Chinese martial arts.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I also wonder how much of that was like to the extent that those fights, I think there's always been a tradition in China too of like the Peking opera style, like show fighting versus real fighting. And I think if you were like, say, a peasant or a farmer back then, and like these two like quote unquote masters came to town, right? And then they like had a fight in the village square, and you had no idea whether these guys had like, you know, whether it was a work in the same way that like wrestling in the U.S. in America apparently started out as being quote unquote real, like they
Yeah.
come to the town and they take on all challengers. But like real grappling is so boring to watch if you
Yeah.
don't know what's going on, like watching a jiu-jitsu match or whatever, that eventually they just started faking it, right? And
Yeah.
then once
Yeah.
they started faking it, they could do the like climb up the top ropes and hit him with the chair or do like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
double backflip and then like slam him with his elbow, even though that actually doesn't hurt as much as just picking the guy up and dropping him, you know, or
Yeah.
doing a slam. And I feel like maybe that's also kind of what happened throughout the history of China was like you had these people who were basically charlatans come to do like an epic showdown, like we're gonna do a duel in the streets in a way to like make themselves both like eligible to be bodyguards or like
Yeah.
I don't know, get money in some other way or take students or something. And really what they were doing was the show fighting style that was much more epic to watch and entertaining, but actually was not real fighting, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of like how Bruce Lee never actually kicked high in Jeet Kune Do, but he did all those insane high kicks and like do a kick and hold it there, even though you'd never do that in a real fight, but it looked good for cameras.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like, I mean, Wing Chun and JKD, I don't think nunchucks are a big part of it, but
Right.
when he started doing the stuff in the camera, it's all about the nunchucks. Like nunchucks are, I'm sure if someone hit me with nunchucks, I'd get hurt. I might even, die. But
Right.
like normally, if you're prepared, like nunchucks are really bad weapons. You might as well just like pick up a rock or something. You probably have more accuracy, like throwing the rock at someone's head than like trying to use nunchucks because like the physics of the nunchuck make it so like even if you hit someone because of the way the string is, the physics of it, it's not hitting at full force ever. Something about
Right.
the rotation, the angular momentum, or something like that.
I also think that they'd be really easy to stop. Like if you just
Yeah,
had like a staff and you put it in the middle, it's like trying to stop a bicycle, right? Like you just jam it in the wheel of the nunchuck, and it just wraps around the stick, and then you've got no nunchuck.
yeah, and it's so easy to hit yourself with this. So you could just like dance around him, outside of the red range, and then like
Right.
he'll just eventually probably hit himself.
But not Bruce Lee, because his are like one hit KOs with those nunchucks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Have you seen there's a guy, I forgot his name. He's Korean. I think his name is like Deok Kim or something. And he's doing a lot of old like Bruce Lee moves, but
oh.
like but like he's doing them now, and apparently he's like a Korean like martial arts master. But
Oh, DKU. That's right.
DKU, right? So like the 1 inch punch, and I feel like what people need to know about something like the 1 inch punch is the only reason why it works is because everyone stands
Yeah.
square.
Yeah.
Like if you stood in a boxer stance, like a 1 inch punch it's not even gonna move you.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Dude, I never thought about that, but the moment you said it, it's true. Whenever they demonstrate, like I've had the 1 inch punch demonstrated on me by a Wing Chun guy before. Yeah, they just tell you I'm not gonna hurt you, and I just a show of power, and then of course they make you stand square, and then you're like, oh, you get rocked back. You're like, wow.
Right. But if I can basically push you and achieve the same effect.
Yeah, yeah, you
Yeah.
go, yeah. I never thought about that, but that's true, dude. I'm so glad I brought you on. This is such a fun. Yeah, like even when Bruce Lee did that original 1 inch punch demonstration, he had a
Right.
chair behind the guy. So like the guy already psychologically feels safe. It was like a chair with a pillow. He's like, yeah, whatever. I'm just gonna sit on a chair. I'm not gonna hit my butt on the ground and whiplash. So he's like already not guarded. He's not even like tense or anything. And then it was just, and it was like, whoa.
Right.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of showmanship, like you said, man. And I think, and what's the martial arts revolution that's going on now, courtesy of a lot of stuff that we see online, is that people are kind of becoming more realistic to what is the showmanship again. Because I think some of that was lost, and some of that was confused by a lot of people, including me. I mean, I'm sure I had moments where I thought about like whatever Tai Chi and stuff like that. I'm like, wow, I'm sure all those flowy moves had applications, and it's like most 99% of it didn't. It's just they had to teach you more to make you come back. On top of it, it did help your dexterity and help you like but what's the word? The word that like people probably in the future will call me this cross lateral exercise. Like cross lateral exercises are so good for your brain, but it doesn't mean they're useful for fighting. Like there was a cross lateral exercise I was doing. I'll show you really quickly. If you ever do music, The
Mm-hmm.
music conductor, one of the hands goes 1, 2, and the other
Mm-hmm.
hand does a triple, right? So like 1, 2, 3. So you can go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You see? So I'm moving two sides of my body differently, but it's really good for your brain power. That's
Mm.
what Tai Chi is really good for. A lot of those martial arts that have a lot of like complex movements, really good for you to build your brain power. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure martial artists who do a lot of Tai Chi or whatever, they would do better at math and like programming and a lot of other things. But they have to also remember, like, that's not gonna make you able to fight Xu Xiaodong.
Yeah, actually, Tai Chi is an interesting one because, like, I'm kind of mentioned it. Like, I do a podcast where we kind of study Journey to the West, and we talk about a chapter a week. And what's interesting about that is that, like, Tai Chi comes from that whole Taoism, like, which was like the religion of China before Buddhism showed up, and then they kind of merged and whatever. But like the theory of Taoism is that there's this whole idea of alchemy, but like alchemy of like not necessarily turning like lead into gold, but like basically this theory that if you meditated hard enough and if you did the right movements and whatever, that you could actually become immortal, or like you could become like, you know, complete, like it's a lot of it's metaphorical, as a lot of religions are. So like the definition of immortal might just mean that like you're no longer phased by the crap that happens to you on this planet during this life, and so you're no different from a god because the god doesn't care. But there's this other alternative reading of that, which is like literally you can, by meditation and practicing Tai Chi and going through the right motions and moving in accordance with nature and whatever, actually make yourself invincible, right? And I think to some level that's like what every human being wants, is the ability to be like the most powerful in the world or whatever. And I think that like it's like the what we're trying to do now in physics, that like theory of everything, like this one solution that works for everything. And that's kind of what Tai Chi through Taoism is supposed to be, right? So like it does have all those health benefits, but that alone is not enough, because if some guy comes and he just wants to never be scared of getting beat up in a back alley again, I have to also like convince him that these movements that will make him more physically fit, like more attractive to women, like have a higher IQ, will also help him like defend himself against 10 people who are coming at him with spears or whatever, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So true. It's so funny you mentioned the Taoists, but whenever the emperors, right, wanted to long live or whatever, they'd
Oh
always
yeah.
consult the Taoists, and it's always the Taoists that would give them like concoctions that would end up like hurting them. Like Emperor Qin ate those mercury pills.
Right.
I know there were other ones where it's like you had to get like I don't even want to use this word, but the big V card blood from like women who are the big
Mm-hmm.
V, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Or like get like baby something. It's like what? Where are these Taoist people making these up? And also, why are people even believing them? But then you think about that and you're like, well, look at it now. People are still believing all this no touch stuff. So like I'm looking retroactively back and like, how did those emperors believe it? Well, look at that. We have people. I mean, Ronald Reagan's wife Nancy consulted astrologists and stuff like that. So right, it's just human. It's just part of being human.
Well, and you know, not to get too crazy into it because there is real science, but like the fact that when Costco, the first Costco opened up in China and it was like flooded by people, and like their supplement section just completely like vanished.
Oh my
And like
goodness.
if you think about like what is like cod liver oil, or one of those like things that's supposed to be a panacea that like will like cure all the things and lower blood pressure and prevent cancer and all that, that's kind of no different than like like long living eternity pill,
Yeah.
right? It comes in the same similar form, it's just uses a different kind of mumbo jumbo. Thankfully this kind actually has some basis to it,
Yeah.
although eating cod liver, taking like liver pills or vitamin D your whole life will not actually make you like cancer free forever, you know?
Yeah, exactly. The unfortunate part about the human body is that it's just so complicated, and you pump yourself with supplements, they might help, but unfortunately the diseases will always find a way.
Right.
That's the unfortunate part, but I guess that's what makes research so fun. That's what makes science so fun, and people like that. And in a way it's what makes medicine so fun, because like you're trying to like help people. And yeah, it's weird. And I'll be honest, man, this whole lockdown, it's it's made me almost like tempted to go to med school or something. And maybe like, and I mean, if the process doesn't take 10 years, if there's some kind of reform to the whole entire higher educational system that can come out of this, times of crisis, there's always big policy changes. Then if let's say med school can only take the whole thing, so like med school and residency, all that, if it's a bridge, it only takes me 5 years, maybe I will go back to med school. I think that'd be really funny. Like I feel like there's so much lacking in just like so much in the medical field, especially when it comes to like athletes and martial artists and stuff. Or like, there's just so much bad advice, so much like just counterproductive stuff where people get hurt, whether concussion or whiplash or like some kind of sprain or some kind of tear. Like there's also more and more technology available. I just feel like we're on the cutting edge, and maybe within the next 50 years, very few injuries will be permanent anymore. At least when it comes to like sports and martial arts and stuff like that.
Well, one of the things I think that they're also finding is that it's still a trade-off. Like, if you want to live forever, they might be able to alter your DNA so that you can, like, the cells reproduce faster and more often. But then what you get is your chances of getting cancer actually increase.
Yeah.
Because if you have bad cells and they start spreading, they'll spread faster.
Yeah.
However, if you don't have cells that spread that double that fast, then you get this other problem, which is you don't live as long because they just break down. You can't produce new cells at the rate at which your current cells are degenerating.
Yeah.
As for like med school and stuff, I think that's really interesting. I wonder if there's like, now with all these courses and stuff going online, I don't know if this will do more harm or more than good, but like in the same way that people are basically giving themselves MBAs, right? Like if you take all the courses and read all the books, you can basically know everything there is to know about running a business and actually build a quite successful one if you are willing to put in the hard work. Like I wonder if you could do, like, if that will start happening with medicine too. Like this lockdown is demonstrating we clearly don't have enough medical workers to treat all of our ailments when something like this sweeps through our society. So it actually it behooves all of us in the same way that like you and I want to know a basic level of martial arts so we can be competent and capable in a physical altercation. Like what about all the health stuff? It's like we should all, maybe it's useful that we all know how to do our own sutures if we were ever to cut ourselves or something, right? Or like how to set a bone, or like the basic level things that like, not even doctors, but like military medics know, like that might be stuff that would be useful for all of us. And that and basic medicine, like, hey, if you get these herbs, it's just as good as taking like an anesthetic or something,
Yeah. And on top of that, I think probably what this lockdown is going to encourage a lot of people to do is, besides like the medical stuff, some of the other basic stuff, like how to cook, how to filter water correctly, maybe even like how to grow your own food. I mean, you spent time in Taiwan. A lot of people in Taiwan, just like a lot of people in China, grow their own food, man. Like, like let's say they have a rooftop, they'll like grow stuff, or they have a balcony, they'll grow food. Like that stuff is basically lost in America. Only maybe farmers and maybe certain hippies and preppers, and then those are probably the only people. Like your normie, your average person, your average family doesn't just grow food. But in China, in Taiwan, that happens all the time. Most families at least try one thing. They'll grow like a tomato, or they'll grow like a squash or something like that.
Right.
Or grapes, man. I remember growing grapes, and then they would always get eaten by birds and stuff.
Yeah, I remember that too. Like my grandmother always had tomatoes and other plants and stuff, and I think my mom also would like occasionally, and then there would be fads that would like sweep through the community. Like suddenly everybody was like having apple cider vinegar for whatever reason, or like
I remember that. Yeah. And then one of my favorite things was then what do you use for fertilizer, and like the old joke in a lot of Asian countries, like, hey, just have your kid pee in the plant.
We actually, funny, I did that when I was like 6 years old because my grandma was like, we just go pee in the plant because that's going to be good. And then we ended up killing it.
Yeah, I did too. What you don't realize is like urea, right? Urea is toxic. You don't want to give plants urea. But that's what your urine is. And because I said that word, I'm probably demonetized, but whatever.
Yeah. We did a really good job of not swearing, but I guess there's nothing you can do about that. I know that
I'll probably take that word out. So I'm going to write this down, 5906.
While you do that, couple things that reminded me of is one is people used to in the Middle Ages used to use that as bleach. Like they would
Yes.
use urine as bleach. And then if you go even further back, like the Celts and the Gauls used to put that like they would mix that with like lime and then put that in their hair so that they had like really spiky hair. I think they would like go
Uh,
into battle looking like Super Saiyans or something because like
yeah.
yeah.
And I know they would also boil and sanitize the urine and even use it as mouthwash sometimes. Like back in the day when they had wooden teeth. No wonder they had wooden teeth, but they tried.
Yeah. No, it's nuts to think that like I think when you are closer to the earth, that stuff doesn't phase you,
Yeah.
right? In the same way that like once you become a parent, like poop doesn't have this quite the same level of grossness to you as it does when you're just like a kid or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think there's like a lot of those kind of remedies and stuff that we've definitely lost to like the various herbs and things. Like we only it's like only when we forget about it does it then come back as a superfood that everybody has to get, like
Yeah.
turmeric or something. Whereas like back then, turmeric was just one of a million other ingredients that everybody had in their cupboard just to have for when the kid had upset stomach or
Yeah,
something, right?
yeah. Or my favorite thing is the goji berries that like now is
Right.
so trending. And those like everyone in Asia used to eat those. Those were like abundant because everyone knew they were like health foods. Like
Totally.
everyone put goji in their tea and in their like chicken soup and stuff. But like when they came to the West, like every store started selling them for like triple the price. I was like, wow.
Yeah, and it like has to go in like an acai bowl or something in order
Yeah.
for it to be popular here. Yeah, I was thinking about I was looking into tea for a little bit because I was trying to quit drinking so much coffee.
Mhm.
And people used to use tea as like a currency because you could like press it into bricks and have like pu'er tea is really good for you apparently. And they used to give it to the Mongols and they would trade it was like so valuable that they would trade it for horses. Like the Mongols would give you horses and then you would give them like pu'er tea because they had a high protein diet
Yeah.
and so they would frequently cause indigestion and the
Yeah.
way that they would deal with indigestion is they would mix like tea with like mare's milk and then drink that and it was just like
Wow.
yeah.
Dude, that's fascinating. Pu'er tea is definitely it speeds up your bowels. If you drink too much of pu'er, you're gonna be on the toilet a lot, definitely.
Right.
I heard a similar thing, which is besides trading it with the Mongols, pu'er started growing in Tibet because like in Tibet it's so high up in the mountains, like
Mm,
it's not good for your body. I mean your body adapts, but your body can't adapt completely, right? Because the human genome started in the savannas of Africa, so we're built for that type of life. But anyways, like pu'er tea apparently really helps with high altitudes. I forgot what like benefit, but it helps with high altitude living too.
mm. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
There were a lot of benefits and tea was actually something that was like another like highly guarded like Chinese secret for a long time.
yeah,
And then like it was like not until much later that like people didn't even know that like black tea and white tea and green tea were all from the same leaf.
hmm
Like it's the same thing, it just is prepared differently. But
yeah,
back then people thought you had to get like three different plants in order
yeah.
to grow the different types.
And a really funny thing about tea was that after the Song dynasty fell to the Mongols, a lot of Chinese culture was lost. And in fact, a lot of Chinese technology was lost. One thing
Hmm.
that was lost was the original way of making tea, which is how matcha is made, mocha.
Hmm.
Like mocha. Well, the thing is, like, that's actually how they used to make tea before like the Song dynasty fell. Like, and the Japanese, to their credit, kept all of that. So like if you have
Right.
what now people call matcha tea, that's actually as Chinese a tea, like traditional Chinese as possible. And Japan influenced Taiwan's culture a lot. So I assume like Taiwanese people know how to make matcha, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
funny you mentioned Japan. So this I don't believe at all. I want to like stipulate that I don't believe this at all. If there's like Japanese listeners, like don't get mad at me. But there's like a legend that Emperor Qin Shi Huang was like searching for the elixir of life, and he had like 5,000 men and women, and he like sent them out, and he was like, "Don't come back until you find it." And those people were like, "There's no way we're gonna find some kind of like immortality-inducing drug out there." So then they ended up actually going and settling Japan, and that is actually like the origin. I don't know if you've ever heard this
yeah, I've
before.
definitely heard that. And yeah, I've definitely heard arguments for and against that. So, but it's a very interesting kind of origin story for how sort of like a more Sino look mixed with kind of the Japanese Aboriginal look kind of ended up in Japan. So yeah, I've definitely heard it, and it's a fun thing to talk about, especially on like history shows and culture shows like that.
Right, yeah. I know because like the Ainu apparently, like there's even the oldest Japanese historical records are about them fighting the Ainu, which are like the original natives of Japan. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow, it's so interesting. The other funny thing that talking about the subject of Japan, like the katana making and stuff, what people
Hmm.
don't realize was that a lot of that swordsmanship was brought over from China too. So like a lot of
Hmm.
those amazing Japanese swords actually came from China. Just China lost that technology once the Song Dynasty fell. So it's
Hmm.
so interesting that like the really interesting thing about China, and I don't think China gives other countries credit for, is that a lot of great Chinese traditions did, in some ways, get preserved in other countries. In fact, other countries that eventually had more conflict with China than friendship. But it's just like it's beauty that like Chinese culture spread so far, but it's like China loves to like own up to its own thing and always show that it was always its own contained thing. But you really look at archaeological evidence, even in like the early days of like even warring states, if not early, like during the Zhou dynasties. I mean, the warring states happened during the Zhou dynasty, but like really early China, there were like Caucasian looking people like in China. Like
Hmm.
populations mix way more than a lot of like um traditional archaeologists give
Oh
credit for. And I
yeah.
think within the past 20 years, as we dig up more fossil evidence and archaeological evidence, we've been realizing, wow, cultures interacted way more than we thought.
Right, for sure. I mean, like, apparently a lot of Greek philosophy, what we consider to be Western, like the whole origins of Western philosophy, apparently have roots in like Egypt, and Egypt actually has roots in India, and like these religions and things actually spread a lot more than we realize, right?
Yeah.
So now we're coming to think of like, hey, how come like these, like I went to tour Pompeii a while ago, just like for fun. And one of the things I realized is there's a lot of temples to Isis there, which is like the Egyptian god. And yes, like Rome eventually conquered Egypt, but there's also like that religion actually goes back further because, just the fact that Egypt is popular and people in ancient times, even in ancient times, had something that was more ancient than them that they
Yeah.
venerated and respected.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned the like the preservation of certain Chinese arts and things because I think there's like a necessity being the mother of invention thing where like I feel like because China was so populous and it had such a large geography and they had such an abundance of natural resources that the katana preserved a lot of the Song Dynasty like craft, but you could argue that they perfected it to like an nth degree because iron in Japan is actually not as good of quality than the mainland and the rest of Europe. So like they were working with what they had, and so they had to figure out techniques to make bad iron into as good as possible steel as you could get it.
Oh.
And then similarly, like China has those like warring states periods periodically, but then you get like 2 to 4 to 500 years of relative peace under a specific house of emperors or whatever. And
Yeah.
I think as a result of that, like they had gunpowder going back to like the Song Dynasty, possibly even before then.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not until it gets out of China where people start to think like, hey, if I take this gunpowder and stuff it in a tube and put a stone or a round ball at the end of it, that I can actually use it to really do some damage to people.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
think Chinese military tactics for the most part was like once in a while they would use the cannons to knock walls down, and then the rest of the time it was like they set it off to scare nomadic
Mm.
horses
Yeah.
when they were charging into battle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And on top of that, I think even when you look at when those types of like lethal guns were really being perfected in Europe, it took a while too. Like
Hmm.
for a while, someone with a bow could just fire more rounds than someone with a whatever earlier like to gun. And so like
Right.
it took it a while. And I think like even for a while, like even during the late years of the Ming Dynasty, when Western technology was starting to go ahead of China, the Ming Dynasty still beat off the Portuguese at least twice and the Dutch at least twice. And it was
Hmm.
just because they saw that they had the Dutch and the Portuguese started having better technology, but still, we could still fight them off with our superior skill and our bow and our ship navigation or whatever. Or we can outpopulation them or whatever. So like it takes a while for technology to be used effectively and perfected. And then suddenly when that happens, the people who used to be on top with like whatever their skill or their old strategies just get whipped, get destroyed.
Right.
It's kind
Yeah.
of like in World War One when the tanks showed up, right? Those tanks, I mean, they were cool, but like they were pretty much useless for a while until World War
Hmm.
Two or the
Hmm.
intermittent years, and then they're being perfected. But like, I'm sure if like in World War One when those tanks were showing up, you'd be like, okay, yeah, well, let's just throw a grenade in them. Okay, yeah, that's kind of dumb. But then in 10 years, that's not dumb anymore. That thing is scary.
Yeah, I remember, I think just prior to the First World War, when like planes were getting invented, and they like asked this like colonel in like the English army or something what he thought of it, and he just kind of like scoffed and was like, the future of war will always belong to cavalry.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
like just like horses will always rule the day. Like, get out of here with your airplanes. Like, that's ridiculous. And even like when they first started fighting, right? Like bombing people was literally like you would go up in the air and then pull a hand grenade and then like
yeah, yeah.
throw it over the side.
Yeah, exactly. Man, it's so interesting to think about like the evolution of martial arts in context of that kind of stuff because
Hmm.
think about for a while bayonets were like the melee weapon because since you had a gun, well just put a sword or a blade on top of the gun. So like so much of martial arts, at least like the real lethal stuff was bayonet based.
Hmm.
Yeah, so like you think about that, and then it's just so interesting how the martial arts evolves based on what people are using kind of to like hurt each other. So
Yeah.
like I'm sure, for example, like the whole karambit and a lot of those like little knives, it's because of blade laws, right? So like blade laws, etc., like your firearms laws will change how people kind of like do martial arts. Like if
Right.
nunchucks are banned, which after those Bruce Lee movies, nunchucks were banned for a while. Like most people were not practicing nunchucks in a practical way because what are you going to do? Carry a nunchucks, get arrested?
Right. Right. And like you were saying, it's difficult for it to be a lethal weapon, and perhaps the nunchucks themselves were never really meant to be that, like
Mhm.
partly for show and then also partly just to like get people away from you or like
Yeah,
to knock stuff out of the way as opposed to something that was, not everything has to be a killing blow
yeah,
immediately.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, I think about that. I think about like the martial arts itself as like a specialization that I don't know if ancient Chinese people would have thought of it the same way. Like martial arts as like a form of self-cultivation, and so it was like natural that like a person who was maybe very wise and knew a lot about the way of the world. Like I remember watching a movie, one of Ang Lee's first movies. It's called Pushing Hands, and it was about this like elderly gentleman who was like a Tai Chi practitioner, but his practice of Tai Chi also helped him better understand how the human body worked in that like Chinese way with meridians and stuff like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
And he then also was like a master calligrapher and stuff. So there's that like there's an old in ancient China there was like this idea of like what are the six virtues of a gentleman. And like one of them is like martial valor and like the ability to use the bow. But the other ones were like the ability to compose poetry or like an expert with calligraphy or like an understanding of like horsemanship or whatever. So it's like
Yeah.
now we like kind of focus on the one thing, but back then they were kind of thinking in the same way that, like Musashi, right? Like when you read like his books and things, there's this idea that like you know being a great swordsman is supposed to also mean like being a great samurai or a great swordsman was also supposed to mean that you had a deeper understanding of life in general or of the way of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think now it's like that's kind of why China is hesitant to let that go. Like your MMA fighter can, no, your MMA fighter actually can't beat our Tai Chi fighter. He was just like feeling sick that day or whatever. Because
Yeah.
there's this feeling as if like if he's not good at Tai Chi, then maybe he's not like China's not good at any of the other stuff. When I think in the West we kind of separate all of that. So like we know that MMA fighters can be idiots. Like just look at what John Jones has been doing lately, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there's no correlation with like, oh, like perfecting the martial arts means that you're a perfect person
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's such an interesting point. Like you think about how even, for example, traditional Chinese medicine, how they would always try to treat it like a whole body type of holistic thing. Whereas like Western medicine, and to its credit, that's why medical technology has evolved so much. It's like thinking it's so specialized, 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 specialized. And now as it gets too specialized, a lot of times, for a while I was having neck problems. I still have neck problems a little bit. My doctor, the doctor I saw, just like, yeah, dude, get a Thai massage. I was like, wow, Western trained medical doctors are recommending stuff like massages. And she even said you could do acupuncture too. I'm like,
Right.
whoa, you see, there's always like a pendulum that swings. You get too specialized, people are like, yeah, but what's the whole picture? And then if you go too whole picture, you don't know what the specialization is, and the whole picture often is wrong. So that's a very interesting thing you're talking about. Like, a lot of the martial arts stuff was just part of like a whole picture type of thing. But because like, and that actually might, in a very weird way, like you said, explain how it becomes so personal for so many Chinese people. When like they see Kung Fu get attacked, it's like, oh my God, it's attacking this, it's attacking our herbal medications too, it's attacking our history,
Right.
it's attacking our culture, it's attacking our calligraphy. It's like, no, the West isn't thinking like that. West is literally just thinking about martial arts. Or if they can extend one more, it's like thinking about a system of governance. Oh, why is the communist government? But it's not thinking about all this other stuff. It's literally, like you said, just thinking about one thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
it's like it's hard because I feel like once your ego gets involved, and of course fighting is especially is like very much tied up in that. Like once your ego gets involved, you become it like becomes very hard to separate that, right? Like so
Yeah.
you have those like no touch Bushido schools that like even when they're like beaten, they still won't admit that they might need to learn a few grappling techniques or some actual striking or whatever.
Yeah. Exactly. Wow.
Yeah.
Do you ever go back to Taiwan?
I haven't been back. I went back like a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But it's not that frequent. I would like to go back more often for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I like I was mentioned earlier, we're doing this like Journey to the West podcast, and like the Monkey King, who's like the star of this novel, which is like might be interesting to listeners who are because he's like an expert martial artist. And he's one of those like he's so perfected the martial arts that he has like 72 transformations. And so if you think about like how martial arts are based, a lot of those original ones were like based off of different animals.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of makes sense that if you could turn yourself into different animals, you would also be an expert fighter. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
that was a big digression. What I meant to say was that there are temples dedicated to the Monkey King that I would love to check out and go to China,
Wow.
Taiwan and see. Yeah.
Dude,
Um,
totally. I mean, it's so interesting how like folk heroes in China actually end up becoming like religious figures, like Guan Gong, like Guan
oh,
Yu
totally.
from the Three Kingdoms. That like there are people who worship him and stuff like that. It's so interesting.
Yeah. His is an interesting one too because it actually originated in from like the town or city where he was actually slain or captured.
Yeah.
So like during the Three Kingdoms period, like he died in a certain part, right? They captured him and he died, and then the people felt guilty and they started basically like making offerings to him because he was such a fearsome general and warrior that they were worried he was going to come back and haunt all of them.
Yeah.
And so over time, that like please don't haunt us, respect us became like we're going to start asking for favors because and then like it transformed to the point where now it's like he's obviously the god of war, but that also means he's the god of like honor and respect and dignity, and it's why like policemen and triad members both worship him and make offerings to him today.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's like uh, opposite sides of the law, but we share that one thing in common. Maybe we should all just be friends.
Right. Well, I think also because in like Eastern religion and the yin yang thing is a lot more apparent. So like I think being a criminal versus being an agent of chaos, as it were, versus being an agent of order, they kind of recognize there's still two sides of the same coin at the end of
Yeah.
the day.
Yeah. Wow. Talking about Journey of the West, it's so interesting too. I was listening to another podcast about sort of breaking down some of the interesting philosophical sort of underpinnings behind
Mhm.
Journey of the West, because, it's a novel that, of course, at the end of the day, it seems like the Buddhism in the novel is stronger than the Taoism,
Mhm.
because ultimately, like the Forju, the Buddha, like he seems to be the most powerful entity, even though they're supposed to be like the same, right? The guys, the Taoist guys, the whatever they're called, the Taoist deities and the Buddhist deities are supposed to be kind of like, we don't kind of mess with each other, but because the person who wrote Journey to the West, he wrote it, I think, in the Yuan Dynasty, I believe.
No, I think that it was the early Ming, I
Or
believe.
the early Ming Dynasty. So basically, like, he wrote it in a time when like Buddhism, Taoism, and there's a lot of like clashes of religion in China. So like you can see it reflected in the
Hmm.
book. Sometimes the monsters, according to this podcast, sometimes the monsters you can tell, they had maybe someone on the Buddhism side kind of backing them a little, and sometimes the
Right.
monsters had like Taoist like people behind them, and so like that's why Sun Wukong would have to go and like ask for help so much, because sometimes he just couldn't beat these guys because these guys had like more people behind them, more technology, or so to speak, or more like influential people than what he had. So they had to like go beg them, oh please, your person's out of control, help. Or he
Right.
begged the other side, and the other side's like, that's like the other, it's like there's a lot of that like internal philosophical, religious, and political kind of like under like clashes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I find it so fascinating how much of the culture you can kind of pick up from it and how alien it is at times.
Yeah.
Like it's highly bureaucratic the way like in a way that like I grew up learning about Greek mythology and Norse mythology, Vikings and stuff like that, and they're never like we have to go and like consult and petition the Emperor of Heaven and then also have to like then go and talk to like Buddha and like they have like guardians of everything from like a mound of dirt, like a small hill. There's like a spirit there whose like job is just to oversee the hill, all the way up to like the guy who's in charge of the universe, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very hierarchical and like you hear about like 12 major gods in the Greek pantheon, but this is like there's like hundreds or thousands, like every local village and town, all the way down, I guess, to your ancestors, right? Like ancestor worship was a big thing in China back then.
Yeah. Yeah. And even in a lot of the diaspora, there it's still pretty big, like the Malaysian Chinese and stuff like that. A lot of that
Hmm.
diaspora, very, very, they still worship their ancestors like in the mornings and stuff. It's amazing how much like again, we talk about Chinese culture has still been kept up in a lot of diaspora or in a lot of cultures and nations inspired by China.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't until my last trip to Taiwan when we went, because my dad is from like the countryside and he's from very south, like the southern tip of the island. And we went to the town where he grew up, and there's like a huge temple there that's still being maintained by people I'm related to that I've never met before in my life, that are like, people who just stayed and never left the home country. And
Hmm.
like in my house, well, what I guess my dad or my grandpa's house, there's a plaque, and on it it traces like the all the people who all the men in the household going back like 26 generations. And
Wow.
apparently we crossed over from the mainland on like generation 18 or 19. And so
Wow.
you and like they have even like my name is on there, and I had no idea. My name's on there, but it's covered with a piece of like red cloth. And the idea is when you pass away, they take the cloth off, and so these are like all the names of all the people who have come before in this family.
Wow. That was big in mainland China too, but then a lot of it got lost, unfortunately, in communism. Like a lot of
Right.
people had to literally hide their lineage because they were afraid if my lineage gets revealed, they're going to trace me back to someone that used to make money or used to like hire people. So they're going to go after me because of like 20 generations ago. So most people destroyed those plaques. Like my
Hmm.
dad's side of the family had stuff like that, but they totally like they changed their middle name, because the middle name
Hmm.
usually is your generation. They changed all of that because my great grandfather was a landowner. So, it's
Hmm.
none of our faults. It's not like my parents or my grandparents even had any of the wealth. But it's like if they're gonna go after you, like, oh, this person, oh, oh, oh.
Yeah,
It's like
my
we don't even know who our original ancestors are, and like I like to joke that our ancestors are from the same place that Liu Bang was from, so we
Oh
could have
wow.
been related to the
Right.
founder of the Han Dynasty, but we'll never know because we changed all our ancestry. But
Right.
maybe it's not a good thing to be related to him because he was kind of not a nice person. He had to
Well,
do what he had to do to become emperor, but he's not a nice person. Nice is not the way to describe him.
well, hey, if you're related to Liu Bang, then aren't you also related to Liu Bei, who's like the righteous hero of the Three Kingdoms novel?
Yeah,
So I guess you
exactly.
can just claim lineage to that guy
Yeah,
and talk
exactly.
less about his grandfather or whatever.
Yeah, Liu Bei was smart, man. Apparently the guy he claimed he was descended from, that guy had like 100 children. So like he could have easily just been like, no, I'm actually not related. I'm just gonna make it up. You never know, but like because he had the Liu surname and he had like the facade and everything, he had the two brothers. It just like made sense for people. People needed to follow someone because in times of struggle like now, think about America in times of like uncertainty, people want to follow people, and it's just like people they just cling to something, right? That's how Caesarism evolves too. But that's another conversation for another time. But you know, yeah, lots of philosophical stuff that we can talk about in the future or on another channel or something like
Yeah,
that.
would love to for sure. Yeah,
Um,
and if
Tell us about your podcast more.
oh, okay. Well, I basically covered it. It's sort of like we were saying. It's every week. My buddy and I from university, were both like just decided we were really into Journey to the West.
Uh,
Um, I particularly have an affinity for it because when I was a kid, my grandfather on my mother's side. So my mother's side, their surname was Sun, and Sun happens to be the same similar surname to Sun Wukong, who's the
yeah.
hero of that novel. And when I was a kid, my grandfather would tell me that we were descended from the Monkey King.
Oh.
He actually claimed that he was the Monkey King because, like, the Monkey King never dies at the end of the novel. And so
Uh
when I
huh.
was like 5 years old, I believed him.
Uh huh.
Um, but then, like, as I got older, like, I remember, like, I watched the live action series and stuff like that. Like, I think it's one of those like weird, almost like hidden secrets about Asian culture that like the West never really knows that much about, which is that like almost all of us at some point encounter Monkey King while we're growing up,
Yeah.
but we just for whatever reason like it doesn't get shared with the other side, and so doing an English language podcast, going through a different chapter every week, and just kind of delving into the philosophical ideas about it, or like how it relates to Chinese culture, or just like doing kind of like the like literary analysis of it that I feel has been done to death for like Western myths and other cultural stories. Uh, would It's just something that we love doing. So every week we like summarize the chapter and then we delve into like you were saying, like what is with the like the virgin blood stuff, or what, or like the yeah, like why did they think that Mercury would make them live forever, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Um, how long do you think, like, how much material do you think you'll have for this? Will you be able to keep up this Journey to the West talk for, let's say, 2 months, 2 years, or what's the plan afterwards?
Well, we've got 100 chapters to go through, and we do a
Wow.
chapter a week. So it's, and in some weeks we end up having to take breaks, or we talk to other experts or whatever on it. So probably a minimum of 2 years,
Wow.
um, and we'll see. Part of my like secret hope is that at some point, like the Chinese government or whoever is gonna make a real like epic Journey to the West movie or something, and then that would give us like a lot of stuff to talk about and maybe get us more noticed in the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's interesting is written. It was written around the same time when a lot of medieval books were coming out that were like, on the surface, it's the story of King Arthur and his knights, but the idea was it's supposed to be what's called like an alchemical text, which is like about transforming the human spirit. And so the idea is like as you read the novel, even more so than like a lot of great fiction that we read now, where we're like, wow, that really changed my life. It was like specifically designed so that as you read it, your psychological and spiritual development was supposed to like allow you to get closer to enlightenment.
Ah.
Yeah, and so one of the prevailing theories is that all four characters. So Journey to the West is about a monkey who is born of a rock, who attains immortality, and then causes all sorts of mischief in heaven, and then gets punished by the Buddha. And his punishment is that he has to accompany a monk and two other disciples to India to get holy scriptures that contain like the official doctrine of Buddhism, so that the people of China can also attain enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And the thing that people don't realize is that all four pilgrims actually represent different aspects of the human psyche, as seen through like the Chinese cultural lens. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we kind of wrestle with this a lot. Like Monkey King, on the one hand, is like supposedly representing reason, your logic, your ability to reason, like cleverness. But on the other hand, he's highly impulsive. And in the West, we see that as like two things that butt heads all the time.
Yeah.
Like there's like you're either a very like logical, cool, like Spock type person, or you're like highly impulsive and whatever. But in China, they don't really see it that way. They're like, both of those are embodied in the same thing. The Monkey King is both of those things. He's both highly impulsive and at the same time like very clever and well reasoning and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean that's a really great way to describe him, because he causes all this mischief, but you know who gets the four of them out of every situation? It's him. So like it is like he's got a duality. It's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what about Tungsten? What was Tungsten representing then?
Tungsten represents like he's very he kind of like grows up very cloistered, and so as a result he is like the letter of the law of like Buddhism or whatever, right? Virtue, but untested virtue. Like he represents like almost like your super ego, or like a kid's version of what like right and wrong is, but often like your conscience maybe. But oftentimes when you actually butt up against the real world, it's never that simple. And so oftentimes he's getting kidnapped by demons and stuff, because it's like you have this idea of what's right, but once you actually get tested, you don't actually do those things, and the demonic parts of your nature take over or kidnap you, or kidnap that part of you and like threaten to devour it whole. And then it takes your like other parts of you, like reason, and to some extent sometimes even like your laziness or your gluttony, which is represented by Zhu Bajie, the pig's part of you, to like rescue that and pull that back out and take you back on the straight and narrow.
Dude, that's so interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. Like one of my funniest things I always say about Journey to the West is that our monk character, either he's like they're trying to eat him or they're trying to marry him. It's one of the two. Like the evil demons, or they're trying to marry him, or they could be human characters too. They're trying to eat him or they're trying to marry him. And it's like I'm like, why? And then it makes sense that it's all like that word he used. I forgot what it was, but it's all whatever, I forgot what word you use, but it's like it's a story, but on the other hand, there's a lot more purpose to it.
Oh, like the alchemical text.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's funny. Zhu Bajie, like from what you're describing, he's like gluttony, but because lazy, the other kind of flip side of lazy is Zhu Bajie often like will take the easy way out, which sometimes isn't like necessarily the bad thing, right? Like, you know, one of the funniest things that Zhu Bajie would always do is like, well, it looks like our monk Shifu, our master, is kidnapped. We're not going to kidnap him. We're not going to get him back. Let's just all go home. Like, Zhu Bajie would always say, let's all go sanhuo ba. Let's all go home. And sometimes that is the right decision in life. You know, you pour 20 years into something and it's not paying off. Don't keep doing it. You chase a girl for 4 months and the girl never pays you any attention. Don't keep doing it, right? So like the Zhu Bajie kind of laziness sometimes can double as very pragmatic.
Right. And he's actually he has his own cleverness too. Like the most recent chapter that we covered, it was like a 3-parter where through some misunderstanding, like the Monkey King gets banished by Tungsten Tripitaka. And they have to get him back, obviously, because Tripitaka is like, he represents that like innocence and purity, but like naivete as well. Yeah. And so he gets like kidnapped, or there's like some turn of events where like now he is like captured, and they have to get Monkey King back. And Zhu Bajie is the one that has to go on this mission. And Shao Jing gives him was it Saoji or the horse or whatever? Anyway, he originally his original plan is to go and tell him that like your master misses you and you should come back and see him because they don't want to tell him that like actually you were right all along. There are these demons out there and you're the only one that can go beat him.
Yeah.
And that fails. So then his new trick is like he provokes him by saying something to him, which is like the Monkey King was like, didn't I tell you when I was getting banished that if ever you get captured, you should just mention my name and these demons all know who I am and they'll let you go. And of course, when they did get captured, Zhuba Jie was like, he thought he was so good that he could just beat the demon. He turns out he couldn't. He never mentioned his name, but now he's in front of Monkey King and he goes, yeah, well, we did mention your name and that demon said that he would skin you alive and that you're nothing and that he could totally crush you. And then that gets Wukong so mad that he's like, I'm gonna go and like destroy this demon and like fight the hell out of him. And it almost doesn't even become about like the whole face saving part of the fact that he got banished and he swore he would never go back.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, it's like that's what makes Zhuba just such a funny character. Yeah, that's so interesting.
And it's funny, something that I realized, we did a podcast with a guy who is in Taiwan now, and he says that like in Fujian province and also in Taiwan, where a lot of Taiwanese people originally migrated from, there's actually temples dedicated to Zhuba Jie, and it's because he's considered in some circles the god of like prostitutes. Yeah, like prostitutes and also the hospitality industry. Because he's so lazy, it's like people worship him because like he kind of doesn't look on like Mainu like beautiful women in the same way. Like he's more forgiving about like, you know, how you like your lecherousness, like his views on sex are a lot less strict than the other gods of the Chinese pantheon or like Buddha, let's say, right? Like if you went to Buddha and was like, I'm a prostitute, what should I do? Buddha would be like, well, you got to quit that job, you got to quit that profession. But like, you know, Zhuba Jie is a little bit more lax with all that because he is kind of like a more of the flesh, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty interesting, dude.
Yeah.
Wow. For those of you watching, I will definitely link Richard's podcast for you. You know, this was a great conversation about just in general culture and history and stuff like that. So, Richard, you can just send that to me via Skype afterwards. So I have the link here. But guys, this was a great conversation with Richard. Richard does BJJ, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and probably will go back into Muay Thai once this lockdown happens. But in general, Richard is a thinker. I mean, to work in the advertising industry, you have to think. So I like talking to thinkers. So for those of you watching, man, if you have any questions about anything, whether Chinese history or BJJ, leave it in the comment section, or you can go to Richard's podcast, talk to him. So, Richard, man, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you too, Jerry.
We can continue talking a little afterwards, but I'm going to end it here. About 90-minute talk, pretty good. So, guys, for commentary breakdowns, leave a comment, press a like, etc., and we will be back soon. So, thank you, Richard.